on this computer. All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Alyssa. I am the educational consultant here at CCA, and I will be your host for this evening. We are going to be talking about having tough conversations. We've probably all been at a point in our lives or know someone in our lives who has had to have those tough conversations, and sometimes just hearing advice or experiences helps with being able to have those conversations or coping with having those conversations. So that is the topic for today. We'll start off with Ellie. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, all. My name is Ellie. I am a PLMFT here at Chesterfield. So for those who don't know, a PLMFT is a provisional license in marriage and family therapist. I've graduated last year from School University. And yeah, I've been a counselor since 2021 here at Chesterfield.
Okay, that is a mouthful, PLMFT. You have to really think about that.
Remind myself.
All right, we'll go down to Mary Kate.
Hey, I am Mary Kate. I am a CIT at Chesterfield Counseling Associates. I am finishing up my master's at Lindenwood University, and I'm under the supervision of Sandra Piper. And I enjoy working with trauma, mood disorders, and boundary or relationship issues.
Okay, and Anna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Anna. I am also a PLMFT, so thank you, Ellie, for giving us the explanation. I have worked at Chesterfield Counseling Associates for about 2-ish years now. I work with adult individuals primarily and couples as well, and I have advanced training in emotionally focused couples therapy as well.
Okay. All right, so we will just go ahead and get started. So just to clarify, Ellie, could you explain what exactly is a tough conversation?
That is a great question. And the answer for that is there is not a, how can I say this? Like, we can't really list what are complicated and tough conversations. And the reason why I'm saying that is because I think we would be doing a disservice as putting like, okay, so we're just going to talk about really hard conversations as in emotional abuse or physical abuse within partners or addictions or infidelity. But I do want to point out that a tough conversation could be anything that's causing you to feel stress or misunderstood, or that it makes you feel like disconnected from the person that you love. So just identifying how we're feeling internally. And if that's the case, then we can already address that. That is like a tough conversation to have because it's causing all of that irregulation emotionally for our clients and people that we see, or even friends and loved ones.
I'm glad you made that point too, because I think some people think of a tough conversation, and we're going to give some examples of some conversations that involve addiction and things like that. But truly, each person has their own experience. And so, and those are all valid experiences. And so even if you don't have one of those big events going on in your life, you might still feel that unease, and talking to a therapist can help with that, no matter the conversation or no matter what you're feeling. So that's a good point, and I'm glad you brought that up. So what makes it so difficult to have a tough conversation with someone you love? Mary, you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I would love to. So there's a lot that could go into making it difficult to have these conversations. Like, it can be hard because you may be nervous about how your loved one is going to react to the confrontation, or you may be worried that they might misunderstand what you're saying or your intentions behind that. Or it could be tough because what comes after the conversation is unknown and it's out of your control. And that can be a very uncomfortable feeling. So maybe you're concerned if you address the topic that the person you're speaking with might feel attacked or upset or defensive. And so, I mean, there's a lot of feelings that could be tied to that. So you could be scared, you could be worried, you could be nervous. There's a multitude of emotions attached to that. And all of them are valid, like you said earlier. And so I think a lot of it is the discomfort of not knowing what to expect and worries about potentially straining the relationship or what comes after having that confrontation. And so being uncomfortable in this situation is a very natural thing. It's very valid to feel that discomfort when you are having these conversations. But that doesn't mean that we should shy away from these conversations. And so because of that, I want to talk about like, what do we do? Because we have all of these stressors involved. We have all of these emotions behind it, maybe some apprehension, but it is necessary to have them, or you're just going to stay where you're at.
Right. So even if it's difficult, you can do hard things and yeah, it's going to be for the better. So I know some people, they might choose, it's not to have the tough conversation, which then can lead to more problems. But then on the flip side of that, there are some people who enable their loved ones to continue with the behavior that really needs to be addressed. So Anna, can you talk a little bit about enabling behavior and how that relates or how that hinders those tough conversations?
Most definitely. So I think a lot of times for a lot of people, when we're talking about enabling, it gets kind of blurred with supporting behaviors. We believe we're kind of supporting this person by not having this difficult conversation. And sometimes it's understandable because then at least they have one person in their corner. So we can appreciate that and validate that and understand why this person is enabling. And there is a huge difference between enabling and supporting. Ultimately, what enabling is kind of pushing the consequences away for the other person. For instance, if we are constantly lying for people or making up excuses for their bad behavior, that can really lead to them avoiding these consequences, and sometimes consequences for ourselves as well. Will this family member or loved one not talk to us anymore if we confront their bad behavior? And that can be scary. And I think another piece of it too is sometimes we are, I guess we could say, we're blind to our loved ones because we love them so much. We don't want to see what they're doing is so negative or is causing them so much pain and us so much pain. So sometimes enabling can just push those feelings off. It's kind of like an avoidant strategy as well. And it makes it difficult to have those conversations because sometimes we're not seeing it or we're not recognizing that we are enabling. And that's kind of the beauty of coming to therapy. If you have a direct therapist, they can kind of point out these enabling behaviors and challenge you to think in a different way. Of course, coming from a caring perspective.
Right.
But
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I was just thinking, like, I personally, I don't have, my background is not therapy. So you making the distinction between enabling and supporting, I mean, I can totally see how some people would be like, oh, I'm just supporting my loved one, but in reality, it's enabling. But if you're inside of a sticky situation, it can be hard to, to determine what that is. So having a therapist come in who is, on the outside of the situation would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's a really big piece of it because sometimes us therapists, we are on the outside. So there is less consequences for us to point out these things we see as obvious, and other clients are so tangled up in all of it that they aren't even aware that it is enabling behaviors.
Right. So a follow-up to that. So say you're at the point where you need to address something, like you're like, I can't take this any longer. I need to talk to this person who I love. It could be any tough conversation. Addiction, abuse, infidelity, but also maybe something that's more personal to them. Where do you start? How do you even begin to have the confidence or get into the mindset of having that conversation?
Yeah, that's a really great question because that's like the scariest part. It's, putting your foot in the door and having this difficult conversation. I think reaching out to people that you love and are a part of your support system to let them know you're having this difficult conversation is a great place to start to get support. Also being aware that most likely this person may not be receptive to the information that you're giving them. It's very likely that they are going to be defensive or they are going to get mad at you. So kind of accepting that and being okay with that, because you are supporting them by having this difficult conversation. And I think another big piece too is, since we have so much love for this person, that's why we ultimately need to have this conversation, is coming from a loving standpoint. Like just using a lot of I statements, which I'm sure we use a lot as therapists, that phrase, but ultimately making sure we're not coming from a like blaming standpoint, making sure we're being careful with the language we're using so it doesn't seem like we're blaming them for what's going on, and more so coming from that caring standpoint.
So, and everyone can speak to this. I know you've probably all had this in your experience. What are some reactions? So if, you might think of like the worst possible thing that could happen would be this if I have this conversation. And sometimes in our minds, we make things way worse than they're actually going to be. In your experience, what are some reactions that people might have when they're confronted by a loved one?
I can answer that because I was thinking what Anna was saying, and I think it's just important to mention too that as clinicians, we're gonna see the defensive comes up. Whenever somebody say, hey, we need to talk, the first thing is like all our defense walls go up. So it's just like making sure that we are aware that that's already gonna happen, and coming from a place that we're trying to be very vulnerable. Using I statements is great because of that, because then we can try to understand the other's perspective as much as our own. But just being very mindful that doors can shut down, and it's our job as clinicians, but also how to guide our clients in this process of like, be aware that that can happen. And there's a lot of patience, it requires a lot of patience. And if you're already willing to have this conversation, we already know there's a lot of love in the room. So honing into that and being aware that not only the other person's going to get their defenses up, we're also going to get our defenses up. Right. Because we're already being super vulnerable, trying to express something that maybe is causing emotional distress. So it's just knowing, okay, the walls are going to be up, and just try to make sure like, okay, we're trying to make sure the walls are transformed into bridges. So knowing that maybe they might not react the way they want us to react. So just being aware of that and being aware of our surroundings too. I think everything Anna said was right on point of how to start conversations. We also know that research shows that having those tough conversations and multitasking at the same time, not the best idea. Okay. So make sure you're in a place that is calm, is a place that you both established that we have the time to do that. Don't try to rush it. Don't tell your loved one like, oh, can we have a conversation? And it's going to be a long conversation and they only have 5 minutes. And then you try to get everything out of the door, and that's not going to help. And try to be on focus as well, as in like, this is the topic and I want to discuss. We're not going to pull back fights we had 10 years ago, 5 years ago. That's unrelated. We're going to address this. But mainly it's just like, prepare. It's not going to be an easy conversation for neither of you. So know that like the fences are going to be up.
Yeah. What would you say, and Mary, I'll ask you, maybe you decided you're going to have the conversation and you have the support from your therapist and you've really talked about it with other loved ones. You have a support system. You have the conversation and it goes terribly. I mean, like, we expected that there was going to be some defenses, but it's terrible. And you start to feel like maybe you overstepped, or maybe it would have been better to just leave well enough alone. You shouldn't have even said anything. How do we kind of protect ourselves from that feeling? Because it took so much for us to even have that conversation. So how do we protect ourselves from that feeling and not taking steps backward?
For sure. Like, there's a couple things that I think are important to look at, and it does involve a lot of self-reflection, because we need to know what emotions of ours are coming up and how we can manage those. So I think it's important to look at, how would you feel if you hadn't had the conversation? Would you still be in that place and desperately needing to have that conversation? Because that might allow us to look into, okay, why are we actually distressed after having it? And I think it's important to see if you effectively communicated your concerns and set healthy boundaries within that conversation. because that does allow you to recognize what is within your control after these conversations and what's out of your control, right? Because healthy boundaries, when we are having these caring confrontations with loved ones, they're very important. You need to know that when you're setting this boundary and you're saying, hey, this behavior is happening, I'm very concerned about you, and you're coming from that loving place, you can set a boundary. So for example, say this is a verbal abuse confrontation, right? And you're setting the boundary of, I am not going to let you speak to me that way. I'm not going to let this continue. You're responsible for setting that boundary. You are not responsible for how the other party reacts to your boundary. So it's important to know that going into it, but also reflecting on it coming out of it, because I feel like a lot of it may be, a little self-blame or maybe guilt for confronting the loved one, because maybe you are overthinking what you did say in this conversation. Maybe you're worried that it came out wrong, or to an extent, some of it, the reaction may be your fault. But it's very important to take a step back and take a look at, why am I concerned? What is within my control, and what do I need to take accountability for after this conversation, and make sure you are surrounded by people who are supportive of you afterward.
And I'm glad you ended with that, because my next question was going to be, how important is it to have a support system, as someone who's tackling this tough conversation or this tough time in your life? Why is it so important to have a support system, and what are some examples of people who could be in that support system? Ellie, if you want to answer that one.
I think Anna said it very brilliantly, as in is important to, even before you have this type of conversation, that you can confide in someone that you trust. Often than not, when I'm seeing clients, either family or couples, I do rely a lot on their support system, because it is important for us to take like a little minute of self-care before and after tough conversations like this. And I know self-care is the word of the buzz right now. Goes for it, but it is important because it is going to activate our emotions in ways that maybe we can expect it and maybe we can't. So having a support system that you can process out loud what you might experience or what you did just experience and get like a different perspective. More often than not, when I see couples, they say, oh, I rehearsed the argument, or I rehearse the discussion with my mom or my sister, because sometimes I'm prone to know that I get very aggressive, and I don't want to do that. I want to be very careful how I'm wording the things that I want to say. So having a support system is really important to validate our experience and making sure that we're not alone in that situation, and that we still have people that care for us and love us, and that can provide that feeling of, okay, everything's gonna be okay. So I would say the bigger thing right now is just like, take care of yourself, take care of the person that you want to have this conversation with, and make sure you rely on the people around you.
Yeah, and I love how you said your support system will help validate you, because it can get scary and you can want to back out. But if you have your support system there who's helping you through this, then you can feel validated in what you've decided to tackle. So say someone wants to they want to talk to a therapist or a coach, and they don't really know where to start. Maybe they've not been in therapy before. How can a therapist or a coach help through the process of beginning this conversation, seeing it through, that kind of thing, Anna?
Yeah, that's another great question, of course. And I think that, as a therapist, like I was kind of talking about earlier, is, we're on the outside. So we see things a lot differently, and we can kind of call things out, whereas our clients typically don't see that because they are so involved and tangled up in it.
Right.
So I think that's a big piece, is if you haven't had the conversation, the therapist can point out that, hey, I'm noticing there's a lack of direct communication with this family member or loved one. Is there a reason? And kind of starting there of like, what is our hesitation, or why are we doing these enabling behaviors? Like, what is the purpose of this behavior? And so I think that's always helpful, because, we're just trying to understand. We're ultimately just curious, because, everything makes sense given context. So we're ultimately just trying to understand that context. And say the client has already had the tough conversation and we have kind of dissected that together in session. We're really just kind of going through of like, if the conversation went really poorly, okay, where did it take a turn? What was happening in that moment? What were we feeling? How did that impact our mood for the rest of the week? Where are we at today? Like kind of exploring those areas as well. And also, I think that Mary Kate, you talked about this accountability piece. Say it did go poorly. Like, let's see what areas can we take accountability in? Where did we maybe fail this conversation? And that be okay, because maybe this is something we've never done before. And once again, everything makes sense given context, and emotions get hot and it gets scary. And sometimes we're trying to get our point across, but we say it a little bit harsher because we don't really know what to do with that. So there's just a lot of processing in that way, and it can look differently for every client, of course. So I think that's a big piece to mention as well.
So in your professional opinion, and Ellie, I'll start with you. And if anyone wants to add anything, you know, a lot of times it's really hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel when you're in a situation that it's got you to the point where you are stressing about this conversation, or it's just too much. And so it's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel. In your professional opinion, as time goes on, are people that you've worked with in having these conversations in a happier, more stable place after finding the courage to have that conversation? So just kind of giving people hope, just like if you do it, your life isn't going to get worse. There is light at the end of the tunnel. So would you say that most people do that?
I would say definitely we do want to instill hope here. So it's just knowing, yes, the conversations can be hard, but you leave it like maybe feeling a little bit better.
Yeah.
Again, it all depends on the client. It depends on the situation. Most people can, like, as Anna was saying, like they can leave the conversation saying like, this was worse. Like it took a wrong turn. I didn't get what I was expecting out of it. But that does give us, like, therapists, a big perspective of like, okay, so what was missing and what did we found out in that conversation? So what I really tell clients is there's nothing wrong, even if you didn't achieve the outcome that you were looking for, because we just have a new piece of evidence to work with.
Right.
I do notice with clients that they do leave those conversations feeling more connected. Again, it's not easy, it's very hard, and it does help to have a process facilitator as a therapist in the room to have that. But research shows and evidence in our room, and I bet Anna and Mary Kay can also attest to this, that once our clients, they're being more vulnerable and they're feeling more capable and confident in expressing their emotions and addressing those really heavy subjects, they do feel more connected. And it's almost, I do believe there's a research that does show that once partners, they manage to have those conversations with loved ones, the increased joy in their life does increase, and it does last longer because the connectiveness is there, and it really helps us to regulate our emotions and feelings. So the emotional bond that we develop with that person, it does increase. So there is a light in the end of the tunnel. There's definitely benefits to having conversations like that. It is a very taxing emotional price to pay for it, but the benefits do, like, they are good. So yeah, I've been noticing that a lot with the couples that I see.
Yeah. I feel like just giving people the hope that, yep, this is a hard time in your life right now. But we're all here to help you through it and things will get better. It's a nice message to hear, because when you're in the thick of it, you don't always feel that way. So all right, well, that is all I have for you guys. Thank you so much for joining me and answering my questions. You guys were all very insightful, and I always learn something new when I do these panels. So thank you for that. Anyone who's watching, these ladies, all their information will be up on underneath the Facebook in the comments. So if you'd like to contact them for anything, they would be happy to hear from you. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alyssa.
Bye.